Hey cupcakes, Lisa here with another hashtag 78 days. Today is day 34. I'm going to be talking about the Knight of Pentacles. But before I do that, I want to go back to some of the things I was talking about in yesterday's video, and I've talked about in other videos as well. And that has to do with the correlation of each of the minor arcana suits to one of the four classical elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and then how those four elements get mapped onto the four characters in the court, right? Page, knight, queen, and king. The classic way of thinking about this comes from the Golden Dawn's appropriation of Kabbalah. Now, from the Golden Dawn's perspective, a Kabbalistic reading, interpretation of the divine act of creation, God's creation of the world, the divine spark entering into matter and creating all that we see in front of us, that is the foundational act that defines what magic is, that defines what creativity is, that defines how will enacts itself upon the world. So the Golden Dawn looks at Kabbalah and particularly looks at the Tetragrammaton. Tetragrammaton just means the four letters, the four-letter name of God in Hebrew. And that name is spelled Yud, which is like a Y or a J. In Latin, coming from Greek, Y and J are basically the same thing. Yud, He, which is like an H, Vav, which is like a V, and He again, which is another H. Now in Hebrew, we don't have letters that denote the vowels. So Yud He Vav He, YHVH. It's hard to know how to pronounce that, and it's literally unpronounceable. But this is just the spelling for what in English we call Jehovah. Yud He Vav He is just the name Jehovah, as in Jehovah's Witnesses, right? This is God. This is the big guy. Yud He Vav He, Jehovah. But in a Kabbalistic interpretation of the divine act of creation, sort of this deep Gnosticism, I mean, these are old teachings. Genesis, the book of Genesis, is interpreted as a parable that talks about how the name of God, the word of God, God as name, as logos, as idea, creates all that is. And the letters explain how that works. So this Yud gets equated with light, with fire, like let there be light. And the way that light splits open the waters. If you think about in Genesis, they're the sort of in the first few sentences, the Spirit of God broods, sits upon the waters, sits upon. I don't have the text in front of me. Maybe I'll quote it below. Look it up and quote it below. So you have Yud, fire, He, which if you think about Yud as being kind of phallic, right, as sort of like a little phallus. I mean, just visually what that little apostrophe looks like. This He looks kind of receptive, like a cup, right? So Yud starts to sound like fire and masculine. He is receptive, it's feminine, and it's water. Vav, now this is like a bigger phallus, right? Vav also feels masculine. And now we have the idea that, God says, let there be light. The light kind of enters the water. It splits open the firmament and the earth, creating the distance between air and earth. So the act of creation culminates in air, which is associated with something masculine and active like fire, and earth, receptive, right, feminine. So now we have in the very name of God, Yud He Vav He, four kind of moments of creation that also break down into masculine and feminine energies and into the four elements of fire, water, air, and earth. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So for a Golden Dawn association, we have a way in which we can, right from the start, talk about this first moment of kind of masterful energy in the world as being Wanzi, Okay, this is the place where, you know, we get this kind of will being imposed on matter. And then we can start to see this water in its relationship to the suit of cups. We can see air as being this next more refined moment in creation after we have the relationship between fire and water. And we get the swords, and then finally the pentacles, the sort of the grossest, in the sense of most massy, most unrefined part of creation in the earth. Okay? So Yud He Vav He, divine creation, we now have an attribution to gender, to element, and to suit. But the Golden Dawn also takes this into the relationship to the four. Ooh, I think we're getting a visitor. I think my dog Sylvie might be joining us. She loves it when I talk Kabbalah. We also get now a relationship to the four members of the court. And here you have to think about the court as defining a hierarchy that again is about creation, divinity, the imposition of will. And so starting from the most powerful figure moving down, we have a relationship between the king, that wandsy, creative moment, the like sort of or originary moment of receptivity with the queen, down into the knight and the page. So the Golden Dawn Association has kings as relating to fire, to the suit of wands, queens as relating to cups, and the element of water, knights relating to the element of air and the suit of swords, and earth, page, relating to pentacles. So yesterday when I talked about the page of pentacles as being earth of earth, right? When you talk about there are 16 courts overall, and in those 16 courts there are 4 perfect, as Rachel Pollack calls them, perfect court figures. So the page of pentacles is earth of earth. The Knight of Swords is air of air. The Queen of Cups is water of water. And the King of Wands is fire of fire. And in each of those 4 figures, we see kind of the culmination of this whole vision of magic and divinity and creativity, all relating to a kind of Gnostic, Kabbalistic, pointing into air, a Gnostic, Kabbalistic understanding of divine creation. So that's the very classic association of things. Now I just want to say a few words about how I've been seeing this for a while now. And I'm going to keep this relatively short, and then I'll talk a tiny bit about the Knight of Pentacles. So for me, what I'm really interested in is the way in which, it's what I call the 4 C's: care, compassion, cherish, and calm. The ways in which the tarot promotes a kind of development of a loving, abundant, and open heart. And my 4 C's are really a translation from ancient teachings that are kind of installed in Buddhism of the divine abodes. They're called in Sanskrit the Brahma Viharas. So or Tibetan Buddhists call them the 4 immeasurables. Sort of the 4 qualities of a loving, open heart. And these are qualities that we can cultivate. So starting with a notion of a general goodwill, a general attentiveness. Sometimes this is called loving kindness, or the Sanskrit word is metta, a kind of attentiveness to the world. Like that's where the starting point is. In cultivating an open heart, I'm trying to cultivate a sense of just fundamental caring about the world, attending to the world. And so I was talking about the pentacles in this sense. The pentacles are all about us opening our eyes to the world around us and to the way in which our marshaling of material nature and resources, whether we're talking about money or natural resources or our embodied lives, how that affects others, and just becoming mindful of that, conscious of that. So I was thinking about the page and pages in general as being the court card that begins with just paying attention, with this act of attending, noticing, being aware of, being careful, being mindful of our world. So in this context, the Page of Pentacles is like the perfect figure of a kind of attentiveness. And so that image I was looking at with you all yesterday from the Borderless Smith-Waite Tarot of the Page of Pentacles holding his pentacle like really reverently and intently. Just this model of a kind of mindful, careful, studious, sometimes the pages are thought of as students, studious relationship to the world. For me, the next step in all of this, and this is where we get into the wands, is to think about compassion. And compassion is actually the second of the 4 divine abodes. And compassion is really that spirit that rises up in me when I become aware that others are suffering and that I need to do something about it. It's this sense of I need to respond to the world. I need to end injustice. I need to fix something. It's really knightsy, right? It's like, I've got to take care of this. I've got to come to the damsel's aid who's in distress. It's all about that kind of intentionality to engage in the world. It's the next step in our spiritual development as open-hearted beings. And this isn't just something Lisa made up. This is like tied to the profound mandala. I know this teaching through Buddhism of, again, these 4 divine abodes, these 4 qualities of the abundant, loving, kind heart. You know, we start by taking care of the world, noticing what's around us, being mindful of it. And then once we start to do that, we become knights. We're like, how do I fix what's broken? We become beings intent on responding to the world. So when we get to the sort of moments of conflict and fighting and battle and standing your ground that are so big in the wands suit, that's what I'm talking about. This fiery, knightsy energy. And so the perfect court figure here would be the Knight of Wands. The Knight of Wands is the guy who's like, I'm gonna attend to the suffering of others. I'm gonna fix it, right? I'm gonna work on it. The next step in this mandala of the loving, kind heart is the Sanskrit word for this is mudita, and it's really weird. It gets translated as sympathetic or empathetic joy, but the way to think about it is in terms of cherishing, like our capacity to notice how other beings are flourishing and to want to keep that flourishing going forward. So where the knight might notice how beings are suffering and wanting to end that suffering, being moved by compassion. The queen, as the figure for this sort of cherishing, is moved by the flourishing of others and wants to see the world nurtured, wants to further that positive energy. This is associated with the kind of overflowing bounty of the suit of cups, the watery nature of that love that just flows out, that nourishes the world, that wants to see all things thrive and grow, isn't just responding to suffering, but is actually proactively nourishing the whole world. And then the final step in this process, again, this is a kind of mandala of the loving heart, is in Sanskrit the word is upeka. It means equanimity. It's the capacity to calmly see everything, to be able to balance and to weigh the good and the bad, to be able to judge with an impartial heart. It's the qualities of a great ruler, right? A great king who commands his or her realm not by controlling, but by seeing everything and by seeing what needs to happen when and where, being able to act in a timely manner because this calm figure is able to embrace everything, to see everything. This to me is a very swordsy quality. It's the quality that, I mean, literally that I associate with the figure of justice, with her sword and her balance, her scales, and also with the ways in which the King of Swords, with his sword, not a sword drawn to respond in battle, but a sword that indicates that wisdom that can cut through delusion, right, and can measure out there's the good, there's the bad, and is broad-minded enough to keep both sides of the story in his or her mind. Okay, so for me, as you'll see, you know, the key difference for me in terms of attributions with the court cards is that for me the knight is associated with the wands and with fire, and the king is associated with swords and with air. In the Thoth, in the Tote and the Smith-Waite systems, that would be reversed. Air gets associated with the knight, and fire gets associated with the king. Okay. Wow, I've talked a lot. Okay, I am actually going to do this in 2 videos. Oh, maybe I'll just dive in. So here is my, no, I can't decide. Okay, I'll just dive in. This is my Tarot of the Hidden Realm, which I edged in a kind of magenta. I achieved that by, I did a brown Sharpie, and then I didn't like how that looked, and I colored it over with a purple Sharpie, and I ended up with, actually, I think the perfect color. I think that looks really nice. Okay, so quickly, moving through the Pentacles, this is going to be the briefest of discussions. This deck is really noteworthy for the ways in which not only it invokes the Fae and their energy. They're not just all of them are Fae figures. There's some animals like these badgers. But every card has a kind of, has a personality to it, and often a single figure. So we get introduced in very deep ways to the energy of each card. Now this a little bit makes the minors very, very similar to the majors. They all start to have a kind of archetypal energy to them. But I've found it, and the courts just sort of fold into the pip cards, because each card just has a figure. But it has been a deck that I've found really useful in understanding some cards that have eluded me, like the Page of Pentacles. I find this figure really compelling. And then probably the least charismatic of all the knights, the guy who's on the slow horse, this Knight of Pentacles. So let me just read Barbara Moore's wonderful description of this guy, and I think it really bespeaks what I've been trying to say with my beautiful whiteboard. Oh, Sylvie's joining us. Okay. Oh, and Homer too. Okay, guys, lie down. Okay, guys, I'm back. You might be able to hear the noise of Sylvie chewing her bone. I don't know how much I am going to have to cut and edit from this, but the dogs joined us. Anyway, here we go. The Knight of Pentacles, and I'm just going to be reading Barbara Moore's description and then close this video for today. He's been away for some time now, wandering the woods, a lone and quiet seeker looking for a quest worthy of his devotion. He knows, has always known, that he is called to service. And this idea of service is exactly what I'm talking about with the wands and the knights. You know, that this is about being called to respond to the world, right? Being there to respond. It's that active, responsive side of the tarot. The cultivation of our compassion, of our noticing of the needs of others. Trained and apprentice, he is ready to give his hand and heart to the right being or cause. It is hard, lonely work searching for a quest, but he is patient. Above all, he is patient. This is, you know, the earthy Pentacles nature of the Knight of Pentacles, is that he's called to service, right? But he's also mindful and attentive, right? Engaged and embedded, watching, studious, right? That studious quality may make it, he's not hot-headed, right? He's gonna mind pay attention to the circumstances before he engages. There's no virtue into rushing into something and taking action just for the sake of taking action. That's the Knight of Wands. The Knight of Wands, fire of fire, right, is all about responding, right? But not the Knight of Pentacles. Even so, his loved ones worry. A knight without a purpose would break anyone's heart. So it seems like he's just not... This guy, you know, because he's attending, right, that kind of earthy pentacle quality, his response seems slow. It's like he's got to study the situation, right, before he delves into action. So it's often hard to recognize the ways in which this being who seems really called to service really is acting in service. And it may be that the Knight of Pentacles seems, you know, it may seem like he's lazy or just slow, or that he's just lost. But he's taking his time because he's trying to understand what is needed. He is not anxious or concerned. He knows that some things, like the bursting open of flower buds in the spring, happen quickly. Other things, like the wearing down of stone by water, take time. That Pentacles, earthy quality, right, is all about his noticing the qualities of things. Understanding that this is easy for him to be at peace. So the divinatory meaning, Barbara Moore says, the Knight of Pentacles is someone who balances the energy of intense inner drive with infinite patience. Experienced and skilled, he knows that timing is everything, and consequently waits until the moment is right before making a move. His quiet demeanor helps him maintain a high level of awareness in any situation. His steadiness and caution can be mistaken for dullness or laziness, but don't be misled. Lack of drama does not mean a lack of dedication. When the time comes, he can be counted on to do just the right thing to achieve the best outcome using the resources at hand. So that wandsy, fiery, being called into service, having this inner drive that compels him, that energetic move to respond to the world. In the Knight of Pentacles, that's tempered by this pentacle sort of careful attending, that earthy quality of mindfulness, that embodied mindfulness. And so he is slow to engage. I love this depiction. I finally understood how the Knight of Pentacles might be someone that I could really love and admire, because otherwise I've often seen the Knight of Pentacles as just like, just dull. But this Knight of Pentacles I might actually, you know, want to have a relationship with. Okay, I love how he's making a pentacle right there. Okay, that's all I got for today. Still a lot of stuff because I'm trying to cover a lot of ground here with basically my vision of the four suits in this mandala of the tarot. What I call the four C's: care, compassion, cherish, and calm, and how they relate to the pentacles, to the wands, to the cups, and to the swords, and then also how they relate to page, knight, queen, and king. Okay, enough for now. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you as always for your practice.